Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Bizarre and Unusual World. This topic has been requested by a lot of you, so thank you to Mr. Death Metal, to Paul, to Jessica, and to everyone else that requested this particular topic. Today I will be talking about the Texarkana Moonlight murders, also known as the Phantom Killer. So please note that this particular case is about a serial killer. It is about murders and attacks, so if you are sensitive to those sorts of topics, go ahead and skip this video. So jumping right into this case, where exactly did it take place? As the name suggests, this took place in Texarkana, the Twin Cities on the border of Texas and Arkansas. They're kind of like shared cities. As for the when, this case takes place in 1946, towards the end of February and the beginning of May. So that's like roughly around 73 years ago. Now for the what. What exactly makes this case bizarre or unusual? The main point of it is it's been about 73 years and this case is kind of like a cold case. There is no definite suspect. No one was ever convicted for these crimes, so it is still unsolved. This case was extremely popular back in the day and even inspired a movie that was called like The Town That Dreaded Sundown or something like that from like the 70s. So this case inspired a horror movie basically. So in short, the Texarkana Moonlight murders were a group of violent murders that happened in around the town of Texarkana. The media and people within the town also identified the killer as the Phantom Killer or the Phantom Slayer were some of the nicknames that were given to this serial killer. The Phantom Killer is suspected of attacking around 8 people during the time between February and May of 1946. 5 of these people did die from these attacks while 3 were just injured. Similar to a lot of cases like this, the attacks were aimed towards couples, especially near Lover's Lane areas. And these events put the entire area on high alert. I mean, it wasn't exactly the safest place to live. The crime rate was pretty high around Texarkana, but still these attacks really had people on high alert. They were terrified. They always seemed to happen on the weekends and at night. So it's safe to say that the town lost their shit as soon as night came. No one wanted to go outside after dark. Businesses actually closed early and a lot of people were wanting to protect themselves or be prepared to fight off this serial killer. So there were weapons being bought, there was booby traps set in people's houses or businesses. Gun sales actually skyrocketed during this time, although that doesn't sound too shocking. This is partly in Texas, so that seems like something more of the norm. A lot of the townspeople would actually barricade themselves in their home with those traps set just in case the killer was to attack. Although most of these attacks for the Phantom Killer, the Moonlight murders, happened out on the open with the exception to the last attack, which we will of course get to. There were some people that were so paranoid with this serial killer on the loose that they didn't even want to stay home. Groups of families would go stay in hotels so that there was like safety in numbers within the hotel rooms, and some people even like left town. Like they didn't want to be around town with the idea of being one of the victims. Now, the police really were on top of this case. They were trying to track down who was committing these crimes, who was doing these attacks, and at one point they did in fact bring in the Texas Rangers to help with such an intense case. One of the investigators included a man named M.T. Gonzalez. Something that's very interesting with this case and that helped the case and the investigation was actually the media. A lot of times with these cases you will hear about the media publishing things they shouldn't and like tipping off the killer. The media and the press actually worked very closely with the police investigation for this and were careful not to publish anything that would ruin the investigation basically. They were very aware of what they were printing and were continuing to work close with the investigation. Because a lot of these attacks were against younger teenage people, a lot of teens actually tried to take the law into their own hands and tried to set up baits for the Phantom Killer so that they could stop him and kill him in return. But the Phantom Killer never took the bait for any of these teenage setups. I mean, I guess that they were just trying to help, but I mean, they literally could have been murdered, so maybe not the best decision, people. So the who in this case is going to be the victims. I always try to mention the victims' names because they are the ones that need to be remembered for a case like this, especially those that passed. So the first two that were attacked was Jimmy Hollis and Mary Larry. These two would actually survive, but it's not to say that their experience was not traumatic. Around 11:45 Friday night, February 22nd, 1946, Jimmy, who was 25 years old, and his girlfriend Mary, who was 19, decided to park in a secluded area, similar to how many of these cases go to basically enjoy some lovers' lane time. Now, the couple was there barely 10 minutes when a man wearing a white cloth mask came up and tapped on the window. The mask looked like a cloth of some kind with eye slits cut out of the fabric. The masked man shined a flashlight into the car, and the couple wasn't sure if they were just being pranked or like what exactly was going on. Now, the killer supposedly said something to the effect of, "Now I don't want to kill you, fella, so just do as I say." So the couple was forced out of the vehicle, out of the driver's side. Jimmy was demanded to take his pants off, and then he was hit in the head with the pistol that this masked man held in his hand. Now, the blow to Jimmy's head was so intense that Mary actually thought that her boyfriend was shot because the crack of this poor guy's skull made such a horrendous sound that she thought it was a gunshot. Now, Mary was ordered to run. She tried to run across the way into a ditch, but then the phantom killer ordered her to run in a different direction. He was very much either playing games with her during these moments or was not mentally stable. Not that serial killers are mentally stable. When he caught up to her, he threw the question back at her and demanded to know why she was running away when he had told her to run. He was forcing her to run and then questioning why she was running away. She tried to tell him this, but of course he did not listen, and he actually threw her on the ground and sexually assaulted her. Now, at some point, Mary was able to get up and run down the road to a nearby house to where she was able to wake up the people that lived there, and they were able to call the police. Now, Jimmy, who was still kind of laying there with a pretty gnarly head injury, was also able to flag someone down that was driving down the road, and they picked him up, they took him to a nearby funeral home, and they also called the police and reported what had just happened. The pair was, of course, taken to the hospital. Jimmy had to stay a little bit longer because he had skull fractures. He is very lucky to have survived. He was hit over the head so hard that she thought it was a gunshot, but somehow he still made it. So that's a miracle there. And then when it comes to their police reports, things started to vary between their witness accounts. Now, they both agreed that the man that attacked them was about 6 feet tall, but then they claimed that through the cutouts of his mask, Mary thought that it was an African American, while Jimmy thought that it was a white man, but both were blinded by the flashlight light, so they couldn't be entirely sure. Police actually suspected if they were just making this story up for attention, since the couple had conflicting reports on who attacked them, and even suggested that they were covering up for someone that they knew that had attacked them. It's like, why would you not say who attacked you then? Is this something that friends do? I don't know. So about 4 weeks later, we have our next victims, Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore. Richard was 29 and his newer girlfriend was just 17. The couple was found dead in Richard's 1941 Oldsmobile sedan the morning of March 24th, 1946. The pair were first noticed by passers-by, just someone that was driving down the road and thought that they had passed out at a Lover's Lane location. The witness actually thought that they were sleeping in the car. Richard was found between the front seats on his knees with his head resting on his crossed hands. His pockets were turned inside out, which some people suggest robbery, while others think it could have been a distraction to make it seem like he was stealing money, and he had been shot 2 times. Polly was found face down in the backseat of the car. Both of them had been shot in the back of the head. Some people speculate that a nearby patch of blood outside the car was where Polly was actually shot, and then she was placed back inside the car, almost in a staging sort of way, like the killer wanted the crime scene to look a particular way. There was a lot of blood inside the car. It was dripping everywhere. It was not a good sight. The blood was actually dripping outside of the car doors because there was so much blood within this car. For the crime scene, they did find a .32 cartridge shell, which could have possibly been shot from a Colt pistol. There are conflicting reports regarding the nature of sexual assault with the second victims. Some people show reports that suggest it did happen, others say no, but it wouldn't be all too surprising considering what happened with the first attack. So after this crime, the police launched this huge investigation with like multiple departments, and by March 27th, 3 days after the crime scene was discovered, the local police had interviewed around 60 witnesses. And by the 30th, there was a $500 reward for any information regarding these attacks. And this is 1946. $500 is a lot of money. And because of that, it brought in a lot of witnesses or fake testimonies, basically, because people just wanted the $500. 3 weeks later, there was another double homicide, and that would be Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker. Paul, who was 16, had picked up Betty, 15, from her band gig she was playing. She was a saxophone player, actually. And this was something she normally did with a band group. At about 1:30 in the morning, April 14th, 1946, Paul arrived to pick up Betty, and sadly, that's the last time that the pair were seen alive. So Paul's body was discovered first at about 6:30 in the morning by a family alongside of North Park Road. There was blood found alongside the road as well, and Paul had been shot 4 times. Betty's body was not found until around 11:30 that day, but she was actually almost 2 miles away into the forest compared to where Paul's body was. She was found lying on her back, fully clothed with a hand in her pocket, and she was shot twice. For this crime scene, it was confirmed that the same weapon had been used for the first murder of Richard and Polly, a .32 automatic Colt pistol. Now, Paul's car was found about 3 miles away from Betty's body and 1.5 miles away from his, which does kind of make me wonder if he had made them run like he did with the first victim, Mary Larry, if that was something that was part of his thrill, was making the victims run away from him. If that's not the case, then like, why were they so far apart? It's also noted with this homicide that both of the pair put up quite the fight. There were defensive wounds and so on. Oddly enough, with this particular homicide, a big part of the investigation was trying to locate her saxophone. They couldn't find it offhand, and so they were kind of waiting for someone to try and pawn it. Thought maybe that could lead them to who had murdered them. It wasn't until October, about 6 months later, that the saxophone was found. It was still in its case, right by where Betty's body was found. Makes me wonder why exactly she would have gotten out of the car with her saxophone case. Is this something that the killer forced them to do? Did he make them run like he did Mary? Was the car moved? There's a lot of questions surrounding this particular homicide within the Texarkana Moonlight murders, and unfortunately there are no survivors, so we'll never know exactly what happened that night. But the placement of the bodies being miles apart, even the car being away, her saxophone being with her, there's just a lot of questions with this one on what exactly happened. And lastly, we have the attack on Virgil Starks and his wife Katie. A little bit before 9 p.m. on May 3rd, 1946, Virgil Starks, who was a 37-year-old farmer and a welder, was at his ranch-style home. He sat down to listen to his favorite radio station while Katie, his wife, brought him a heating pad for his sore back, and then she returned to the bedroom. From outside, Virgil was shot in the head twice through the window. Katie actually didn't hear the gunshots, which is odd. She only heard the glass breaking and went to see if her husband was okay. When she found him dead, she tried to call the police, but in turn, she was shot twice in the face. One of the bullets actually broke her jaw and shattered some of her teeth. Now, what's crazy is, this woman survived. She was shot twice in the face, and she kept it together and made it out. She tried to find her pistol, but she couldn't. There was blood all over her face she couldn't see. So then she was trying to like leave a note of what had happened as she was listening to the killer break into her home. So at that moment, she ran for it. She made it outside and she booked it down the road to where her sister and her brother-in-law lived. Now she's got blood, she's been shot twice in the face, and she is still going. Unfortunately, her sister wasn't home, so she ran another about 50 yards to another neighbor's house, and they were home, they let her in, and they got her to the hospital. She was even awake enough to pay the cab driver that took her to the hospital. She like reached in and grabbed a gold filling out of her teeth to pay him with that. She's amazing. She's crazy, but amazing that she survived something like this. I find her piece to the story extremely fascinating. Investigators were obviously called to the scene and they found Virgil's body, and it seemed as if the heating pad had kind of caught fire to the chair. They also found like a virtual river of blood from where Katie was running throughout the house. She was bleeding everywhere. Once again, a lot of blood in this case. They found 2 bullet holes in the window, and they suspected that a rifle had been used in this case. Also a flashlight found outside of the window, and police said it could have belonged to the Phantom Killer, but at the same time, you know, the motive had changed. He hadn't attacked someone at his home before, and the gun had also changed. So was it the Phantom Killer or was it not? They did find bullets at the scene and a flashlight outside the window and some bloody shoe prints and smudged fingerprints as well, but still it's like, was this the Phantom Killer? Were the cases connected? Is it just happened to be the same town? Officers continued with their investigations. They did different stakeouts at Lover's Lane, although they were concerned that there was the potential that this killer was now killing people at their homes, so that caused even more panic. They interviewed so many different people. They were once more getting so many different leads and suggestions from the townspeople because everyone was petrified, but it wasn't really going anywhere. Some others actually offered up the idea of a sex mania theory for the farm attack. There was no money stolen from the home, so the news article went with the headline that a sex maniac had hunted in murders. The flashlight that was found outside the window was actually sent to the FBI, but no fingerprints or evidence was found on it. Although there had been like a limited number of these specific flashlights made, so some people thought that this could be a clue for who the suspect would be. Eventually, the police were kind of desperate and they started asking the townspeople to make note of the murder times and days, and if they knew anyone that was missing during that time, to turn them in, basically. Like, if you think that maybe you know someone that was gone during one of the murders, let the police know so they can see if they are the Phantom Killer. I don't know if asking the public for more assistance made anything better. It was already quite messy with how terrified the town was. The rumors just flew even more when they asked for people's help. There was even a rumor that went around that they had actually caught the killer, and so people started to relax, when in reality, they hadn't caught anyone. No one was in custody, and there was just so many rumors. It was extremely messy situation from the investigation's point of view to the townspeople investigation. It was just like too much. So how were the suspects connected to these crimes? They interviewed like over 400 people that they thought could have been the Phantom Killer in these various murders. There was even like a man that they thought had taken the saxophone, Betty Jo Booker's saxophone, and tried to pawn it. But then when they found hers in the woods, they knew that it wasn't the case. So they were all over the place with different leads and really trying to grasp any sort of evidence they could to locate this Moonlight Killer. Other witness cases had them bringing in like hundreds more of people because they thought that their loved one might be the killer, or a friend or a neighbor, all of that jazz. Other police investigators started to try and connect these murders to other cases in different areas, but they didn't really add up. They were just really grasping for anything they could at this point to solve this case. So one suspect in this case included H.B. Duty Tenson. He actually confessed to these crimes in a suicide note, but he had various notes and letters written, some of which actually like contradicted his confessions. Like some of his notes said like, please don't believe anything I've written, like I'm not in a sane state of mind basically, while others like admitted that he had been the Moonlight Killer. Friend of his came forward at one point and said that HB couldn't have been the Phantom Killer because he had actually been with him on one of the murder nights. So it was odd that he chose to confess this in a suicide note, but they couldn't exactly question him because he was already dead. At one point they suspected that a German prisoner of war was a suspect, which is a little random, but that was one theory that they were trying to work with. There was also a case in Oklahoma that they kind of thought could be connected to the Moonlight murders. Ralph B. Bowman was also a brief suspect. He claimed to be in a coma for about 2 weeks' time, and during this time he didn't know what he had done. He suspected that he had gone around being this killer during his coma state. In turn, he just assumed that he was the Phantom, but investigators pretty much confirmed that he just had mental problems and they didn't think that he was actually the killer. There was one suspect that they actually found on the side of the road, and they immediately started questioning him because they were questioning everybody, and he failed the polygraph test, which made them think that he was immediately guilty. So to take it a step further, they actually had a doctor hypnotize him to ask if he had been committing these crimes. And the doctor pretty much said that he thought that he was innocent, he was fully hypnotized, and said that he was not the killer, he hadn't murdered anyone. The reason that he failed the polygraph test was because he was nervous because he was having an affair with a married woman, and that made him nervous, and so he failed that. But no, he was not the phantom killer. Now, the prime suspect in this case is Yoel Sweeney. This comes from investigators, researchers, authors. Anyone that looks into this case really thinks that he was responsible. Yoel's main connection to these murders actually came because of things his wife Peggy said. So basically, Yoel was actively stealing and selling stolen cars. A state police officer was following up on a suspicious activity. When they tried to confront him by going around like public places with a witness, Yoel tried to run for it, but was of course caught. Now, he wouldn't talk or speak about anything, but his wife started like confessing everything when he was caught for the car crime, not the murder crime, but she immediately started like telling the police everything. Now, the wife had massive details to tell investigators, and she told them that her husband had in fact killed Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker. Some of the things she mentioned when she was told that her husband was being held for murder, she let it slip, how did you find out? Completely making them look guilty. Peggy also took investigators to some of the locations of the crimes and described what had happened some of those nights, so basically making her a witness of the murders. Now, her story did shift a couple times, but at the same time, she knew some information that had not been released to the public, that only investigators knew about. She had those pieces of the case. And even some of their family members thought that her husband, Yoel, was guilty. So why was the case never solved? Well, a lot of people, as I said, do believe that Yoel was the phantom killer, the moonlight murderer, whatever you want to call him, but by law, they couldn't force his wife Peggy to testify against him. And of course, she did not want to testify, she refused, and a lot of people think that that is a big reason why he was never convicted. She was a big piece of the evidence. He did go away to jail for the car thefts, but he was never convicted or tried or anything for any of the phantom killers or anything to do with those murders and attacks. He was released in 1973, and then he died in 1994. He never implicated himself in the murders. He never admitted it. He never said anything about those attacks. He was never talking about that. It was always his wife that had let things slip. Eventually, Peggy did recant her confession a few different times, but by that time the damage had been done and a lot of people thought that her husband was guilty. However, it needs to be noted that his fingerprints did not match some of the prints that were found at the various crime scenes, so that's important. Another big why this case wasn't solved is they were dealing with so many suspects and so many people to interview, and they also got a lot of people that were submitting false confessions. Like crazy people that wanted to take credit for the phantom killings, and that they came forward and said, yes, I'm the phantom killer. And it was just a waste of the investigators' time because they had nothing to do with the case, they just wanted to take credit. So what do you guys think about this case? Do you think that Yoel was guilty? Do you think that he didn't have to do with the case? Do you think that the killer was never on their radar? Did he move away? Did he continue to kill someplace else or just stop killing? What are your guys' thoughts on this case, the attacks, and whodunit, basically? It is unsolved. It's been unsolved for over 70 years. I doubt we will ever know who the phantom killer was, but it's just crazy what a scare and nightmare it created for Texarkana during this time period, and then it just kind of disappeared and went away. I do, however, find it very interesting that Peggy, Yoel's wife, had some of the information about the crime that wasn't released to the public, which kind of makes it seem like maybe they were guilty. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye!